fishermen tumbling on the seas, far away from dry land and its bitter memories, casting out my sweet life with a band of London love. Now ceiling bearing down on me, say the starry sky above with light in my head, you in my arms.
Well, I started whenever I was 14 years of age at the fishing.
It's a hard life. They're coming in the gale of wind there in the winter time, they get caught in it.
We had to learn off the old fishermen, even navigation, seamanship, everything like that was all handed down to us.
The history of fishing here probably stretched back to about the 11th century. In Italy, they found old charts of the Irish coast, and on those old charts there was fishing area shown off the Co.Down coast where fish had been caught, and there must have been fishing done here since right down to the mists of obscurity.
The coast is particularly dangerous, and for sailing ships it was a real hazard for centuries.
I remember when I was at school there was an old lady called Miss Hughes who had sort of been involved with fishing and boating interests here, and she said that she told us that Portavogie was something to do with the bogs, Port of the Bog. Well, my great-grandfather originally came from Glenluce in Scotland, and he was a fisherman, and he brought his family across here, or he may have married a girl from here, I'm not quite sure. But in common with a lot of the fishing families in Portavogie, they originally came from the Ayrshire, Wigtonshire Peninsula. Say my family name is Beckett, they came from Glenluce. There was Warnocks came from Dumfries. I think the reason why they came across here originally was because there's very good fishing grounds, herring fishing grounds, just about 3-4 miles off Portavogie.
As far as Portavogie was concerned, the harbour in Portavogie had started at a place, the name of John's Port, where there was only about 3 or 4 houses at the outside, and that would be over 350 years ago. Well, then eventually it moved further in a southerly direction till which is known as the Point, Stable Hole, as we called it, where I was born and bred at.
The sailing vessels used to lie inside of a reef here called McCammon Rocks, and what they did was they came in there in the mornings with the herrings. You know, they fished all night, drift netted, and then they come in the mornings and they put the herrings into small punts and brought those ashore. And there are old photographs around showing the men coming from Newton Ards and Belfast with their horse and carts. We call them cadgers.
Even in the winter time, they would have come in at 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and they would have brought their fish ashore on boxes. My cousins and my sisters and that were down and wheeled the fish up the sound. And there was an old gentleman, the name of Adam Coffey. He would have come down to the corner of the house or met us at the beach and got these fish onto his dray. It was a big long dray at that time. And he would have set off at 4 o'clock in the morning, hoping to be in Belfast. He would have changed his horses in Newton Ards, as he had 2 of them on this big dray, and hoping to arrive for 8 o'clock for the fish market opening in Belfast. We didn't call it Portavogie Harbour in them times, we called it Pate. And we have had 2 reconstructions of it since I was a boy.
The basic design of vessel, if you take up to up before the First War, around the turn of the century, they used a fairly large type of vessel, probably 50, 60 feet, called a lugger. And quite a few of these originated in Cornwall. And probably there's still a couple in the museum, in the Transport Museum in Belfast. Some of the old luggers out of Kilkeel were taken up there. But then there was also vessels brought in after that with shallower draft, smaller, which are more suitable to the tidal harbour as it was in Portavogie at that time. And these were called nobbies, N-O-B-B-Y, Manx nobbies.
They were sailing, big 2 masts in them, bowsprit, lug sail. And in 1915 there was one built here, Alice, £200 it cost. In the present day, laminated glass for a wheelhouse in that small boat is £200. That's the difference in the boat building.
My husband's family were all fisher folk, and his father, his grandfather, and his father before had a boat called the Family Friend. She was built in Mahood's yard in 1914, and they worked with her for a long, long time, many years, and then they decided she was getting too small and they would have another one, so they went away and they bought another one, and she's called the Trade Winds, and my son is fishing her at the moment.
I suppose about 1850 or so the boats started to go to Kinsale, mackerel fishing. They went away after Easter and they came back around about the 12th of July. And then after the 12th, they go to the Shetland herring fishing. We'll be back again about November. Most of the boats then tied up in the winter, and the men got what they call here, the men went to steamboats. That was the likes of John Kelly, ship owners in Belfast, and cross-channel boats. They sought employment there until about the Easter of the following year, and they came back again to the fishing. And that's why Portavogie existed for years and years and years.
And they went and they worked with farmers or wherever they could get work. Some of them went to steamboats. And that's the way they got a bit of a living in the winter time. And I worked for 6 months for £3, from 6 o'clock in the morning to 6 in the evening. And you went to the shore for to draw seaweed, spread it in the fields, and spread it out, and then they ploughed it down over at the lawn, put the crop in. And there were far healthier people then than what's it now. There's all the bag stuff they put on the fields now.
The First World War was the end of the Kinsale fishing. I suppose with the submarine warfare, submarines operated a lot in the southern approaches to the Irish Sea.
There was a submarine, a German submarine, came up onto the top of the water. And my father said that my uncle was a very bad helmsman. But that day, he did very well. He manoeuvred the boat round just as they asked him to do. And then my father said these Germans were very handsome men, tall, handsome men.
One of them went aboard and went down into the hole of the boat and put a bomb in her. And their wee boat, I don't know the name of her, but it was Keenan's hunter, rescued the crew.
And she came in that day to Portavogie Harbour, safe and sound. And when my father came home, my mother said to him, "It is you, James." She thought she'd never see him again. So that was that episode. So
with that danger, after 1914, Kinsale just faded out. And then there was a Balbriggan. It was a lucrative fishing. That's Balbriggan in County Dublin. They fished there for quite a while, and they done quite well. But probably the most famous fishing, liked fishing, was the Maryport herring fishing.
It started in the early 20s. In fact, it was, from this village, it was my grandfather and another man called Cully. They were getting ready in the autumn time to go to Dundalk Bay. There was a herring fishery, as the season went on, they went down the coast. And there was a chap called Donnan who was in one of Kelly's coal boats, or another coal boat. He came home and told about large shoals of herring being seen just outside Maryport. And they went off there and established a fishery which went on sometime during the Second World War, in the early 40s. And that was a fairly lucrative fishery.
And you're learning all about seafaring, that you're educated.
scraps of navigation as you hunt the bonny souls of herring. In the stormy seas and the living gales,
and herring was in great abundance. I mean, as soon as they put their nets over the side, the nets were sinking with herrings and they were coming back in. And in fact, it's the most romantic. A few romances have come from the Maryport fishing. But again, when the Second World War started in 1939, the bar and furnace was heavily bombed. I mean, there was all that threat. And again, the fishing petered out at Maryport. By 1940, it was gone.
My own mother comes from Cumbria. My father met her while he was at the herring fishery in the Solway Firth of Maryport. And there's probably half a dozen women who, you know, came to the village in similar means. In latter years, the vessels used to fish out of Campbelltown quite a lot. And some of my contemporaries have married girls from Campbelltown. And if you go right back, there's also one or two families where the women came from the Kinsale area. You know, so wherever they, I mean, it's just naturally enough where the men are working, some of them meet girls and marry them from that part of the world and they bring them back here. When they've evidence that's left, it would appear that a certain family, say my great-grandfather's family came, he took a fairly large parcel of ground, and then as his sons and daughters get married, they divided the property up, or they didn't even divide it, they just built. And the result is, you know, you have a fairly higgledy-piggledy arrangement of houses and small sort of pathways down the sides and down into the sort of the houses. I mean, this has led to troubles in years to come.
I started in Ballyalbert at the boat building. That was my father-in-law. Over 100 years ago, he used to build the boats down in the graveyard, below the graveyard there in Ballyalbert. Then when he died, my husband, I was a Portavogie woman, he was a Ballyalbert woman. I brought him up here. So we started the boat building here down in Portavogie. That was in the 40s and the war years there. So we built boats, so they went everywhere. Then James Mahood, Jim's father, he was building away as well. There were 2 yards was going in the war, so plenty of work for the boat builders then.
When the war, we started to build the fishing boats. Mary McClements and Boy Kay and Earl Isabel, and they're still going yet, some of these boats, and they built during the war. It used to be all going behind, you know, ogres. Electric drills now have. Much the same, if you go to Cork and it's the same as, I don't know, maybe hundreds of years back, and they never improved in it. Just the same kind of tools used. Same manpower. There's no hydraulic for it. The first thing we do when we're building a boat, we get a piece of timber and make the model. You see it there. That's the model of the new boat we've already built. And sections, divided sections over every frame. And at number 10, there's number 10 frame there. And you see it here, that's the half of the boat there. That's one side. The keel's oak and the skin planks larch. And sometimes they build them a roca skin. Years ago, when they were building, 100 years ago, they were pitch pine. I suppose you couldn't get it now, it would be too expensive. There's no sounders, no wireless, no nothing in the start. Now everything, you can see fish getting into the nets now. At the start, there was no wheelers at all in the boat, just a fella in the stern with a tiller in his hand.
The old men, they say they could, when you were the herring, they could have smelt the herring.
All good accommodations, galleys and cooks and everything in them the day, which, and them times we hadn't. You had to live a lot rougher.
When we went to the herring fishing, we had herring for our breakfast. That was boiled herring. We had fried herring for our dinner and potatoes. And then we had fried herring and capers then for our tea at night.
And whenever you went down to sleep, well, you could find the smell of diesel oil or paraffin oil. It was paraffin at that time. And all the smell of the engine. And whenever you went to get your grub, well, you could feel the taste of the oil on your grub.
The fishing I've talked about so far was herring and mackerel fishing. Now, in 1934, 2 boats were sighted working off Arglass, and when they arrived in Arglass that evening, they were the Morning Star and Amaranth from Lochmouth, Scotland, Jimmy and Willie Thompson. These were 2 master fishermen. They brought a bigger boat. They were stronger boats. They were helpful men in their own way. They were friendly. They communicated all their knowledge to the local men. And from 1934, sea netting started to become the main fishing from here. And that lasted for the next 20 years or so, into the mid-50s, until the stocks of whitefish started to get depleted by the amount of fishing boats. And then the prawn fishing took over then in the 1950s, and prawns have more or less been the bread and butter of the Ulster fishing boats since then.
But we got away from the small boat altogether, and these boats goes away till Isle of Man there every Sunday night at midnight and Monday morning, and some of them's not back until Thursday and Friday. Keep their catch aboard all the week.
Up until the last war, there wasn't a lot of women went to work in factories and everything. They worked in their own house, and they were very, very good at needlework. And the result was there was a big embroidery industry.
I learnt to sew from the age of 9 years, and after I left school at 14, I took up the sewing and always seemed to improve a wee bit more on it until I learnt it.
I was 9 years old, and I had chilblains in my heels, and I was off school. And my mother got me there was an old lady, it was John Shaw Brown's work, and she had wee cloths, like centres with shamrocks, and I sewed them. And Mother said you could wheel a wheelbarrow between those shamrocks, they were so bad. Tuppence, 2 pence. Then after that I started to sew like Mrs. Adair in earnest,
An agent came down and distributed here to each one. So we worked at the sewing, and as soon as we had the sewing done, well, we purchased our goods with it.
The ladies of Portavogie had to sew because the fishing was bad, and they had to help their men out, and they sewed. And I remember my mother and me, we used to sit, it was the oil lamps at the time, we didn't have electric, and we sewed maybe all night, got up and washed our faces to keep us from sleeping, and then we started again, filled up the lamp and sewed away until morning. And we didn't have anything to eat.
And you got different sorts of embroidery. You got initials, and you got what you call bunches. If you were a good sewer, well, you got special work. And I've done a lot of work for Her Majesty the Queen. I've been doing a lot of crowns recently for her, in towels and in pillowcases and in sheets.
That industry has almost died out, but I remember we're running about as boys, you'd have seen the summer's day, the women all sitting outside chatting away with their hoops, sewing away. And I think they did the Pope's vestments for some of the coronations, which were in Portavogie. Bit of an irony,
Take me out of the deep waters. Let not the water floods drown me, neither let the deep swallow me up. And as we look to the future, we pray that God will be with all those who seek to serve and to save lives on the sea.
Storm
1783, the Belfast Chamber of Commerce had just been formed, and the Belfast merchants were losing so much money in shipwrecks down here that they urged the Dublin government to provide money. And largely through the good offices of the Marquess of Downshire, the Dublin Parliament voted £1,400 for a lighthouse to be built on the rock. Obviously, it was a boon to sailing ships, but a sailing ship caught in a gale, even if it could see a lighthouse, it couldn't do very much often to save itself. And there were outlying rocks on the seaward side of the South Rock. There's a ridge of rocks projecting eastwards into the main shipping channels.
It was very dangerous, and that's why they had to build the old lighthouse, because there were so many shipwrecks at that time, sailing ships. And as I say, it is one of the oldest lighthouses in Britain. So this South Rock lightship was put here in place of it, which is 4 miles offshore. Literally because it's the most easterly point in Ireland, and the sea traffic has to come round it no matter whether they're going north or going south. The convoy during the Second World War went in ashore a mile or a mile and a half to the south of this point, South Rock, and I think there was 11 ships altogether went on shore.
There used to be 9 lightships on this coast. Now there's only 2 automatic ones, one off Waxwood and one here. They kept this one here because of that point there, you know, they're coming around it, they're out of sight. But most of the men had hobbies, like ships and bottles. They used to make brushes from horsehair and mats, rope mats. I used to make rope mats myself. But generally you had to use your time off in your own way, you know. You had to put the time in, because you just don't go to bed and sleep. You get 16 hours off out of the day and 8 hours in watch, 2 4-hour watches. But you used to have yachts calling in the summer months, Steve, close by Richie, the newspapers. That was one of the things we did. Although the wireless give you the up-to-date news and the TV give you up-to-date news. But it's nice reading the newspaper.
One of the most famous wrecks on the South Rock itself occurred in 1908. It was a very fine French sailing ship called the Croisset. She'd come all the way from New Caledonia in the Pacific with 3,500 tons of nickel ore bound for Glasgow. She'd braved all the hazards of the long voyage and was only a matter of hours from her destination when she went aground on the South Rock, and within a day or two was breaking up. She was probably the biggest sailing ship ever lost on the Ulster coast.
I wouldn't say there are any better men today. I would say the older men were far better seamen.
You must have salt water in your blood before you become a fisherman. Well, having said that, I'm beginning to have second thoughts. We have been mixed up with this youth training program, so therefore we're trying to inject salt water into a lot of youngsters that never knew anything about the fishing. And I would say without the youth training program, there would be some of the boats tied up against the wall for the want of crews.
You know, I remember when I was a boy, in the 50s, there was only maybe 26 vessels. So the village has grown with the fleet. I imagine there must be a couple of thousand people all told here. But that's in 120, 130 years. The thing has just grown. And the fishing industry has grown with it. I mean, we've 82 trawlers now.